"Sir, your daughter isn't sick. You're being lied to by your fiancé." A poor black man in his late 20s, wearing a borrowed uniform, pointed straight at the bride-to-be. "Shut up. What did this waiter just say?" "The pills you give her every night. They're not vitamins." Champagne splashed across his face. "You dare speak at my table?" "Open her purse." "Mr. Langston, that's your proof." Her jaw tightened. Then she snapped. "Call the police. Security. Get him out." Harrison Langston's hands gripped the edge of the table. He looked at the young man. Then at his daughter Avery, trembling in a wheelchair, her hair thin as paper. 80 guests watched in stunned silence. No one defended Jalen Whitaker. Everyone wanted him gone. But before this night was over, every one of them would wish they had listened sooner. "Man, you think that was brutal? Wait till you hear how this kid ended up in that room." Earlier that day, the Langston estate sat quiet under a copper autumn sky. 12 acres of manicured lawn rolled down to a private lake in Greenwich, Connecticut. Stone walls wrapped in ivy. A vintage sailboat rocked gently at the dock. This was old money territory, the kind of place where even the silence felt expensive. Harrison Langston had bought this land decades ago, back when Stonebridge Pharmaceuticals was nothing but a rented lab and a dream. One FDA approval changed everything, then another. Then another. Now the company was worth billions, and Harrison Langston was the man who built it with his bare hands. Tonight, his estate had been transformed. A wide white tent stretched across the south lawn. Italian marble laid over the grass. Thousands of white roses arranged in towers along every table. An 8-piece string quartet tuned their instruments near the fountain. Every detail hand-picked. Every flower placed with surgical precision, all designed by one woman. Selena Voss stood on the terrace in a silk robe, directing florists like a general commanding troops. "Those roses are off-center. Fix them." "The champagne towers." "Taller." I said taller. Staff moved around her in quiet terror. She was beautiful. She was composed. And she controlled every room she entered. Selena was in her mid-30s, a former ICU nurse who had left the profession a couple of years earlier. She told people she had burned out. The truth was quieter and uglier. Medication discrepancies on her ward, an internal investigation, a private settlement, and a resignation letter no one ever questioned. She met Harrison at a charity gala 6 months later. Within a year, she had moved into the estate. Within 14 months, his daughter started getting sick. No one connected the two. Avery Langston had been a different person recently. A Georgetown graduate, an equestrian, a nonprofit worker, a girl who ran half marathons on weekends and laughed louder than anyone in the room. Now she weighed barely over 100 pounds. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her hands trembled so badly she couldn't hold a glass. Some days, she couldn't leave the wheelchair. Doctors ran test after test, autoimmune panels, thyroid screens, MRIs. Nothing conclusive. Dr. Clayton Reeves, the family physician for 15 years, settled on a diagnosis of atypical lupus-like syndrome and adjusted her medications every few weeks. Harrison watched his daughter disappear piece by piece. He held her hand at dinner. He kissed her forehead before bed. And he thanked God every night for Selena, the woman who prepared Avery's supplements each morning, who sat beside her during doctor's visits, who seemed to care more than anyone. He had no idea he was thanking the woman who was killing her. The supplement was the weapon. A custom capsule ordered from an overseas compounding pharmacy under a fake wellness brand. Inside, thallium sulfate, odorless, tasteless, undetectable in a standard blood panel, mixed into a vitamin D capsule that looked identical to the real thing. 1 pill every night. Slow, invisible, and devastating. Selena had done the math. Harrison's will split the estate equally between Avery and his future spouse. If Avery died or was declared mentally incapacitated before the wedding, the entire fortune went to Selena alone. The wedding was soon. Dr. Clayton Reeves was not a monster. He was something almost worse. A man too proud to admit he was wrong. 58 years old, Columbia trained, trusted by the Langston family for over a decade. He had looked at Avery's symptoms 100 times and never once ordered a heavy metal panel. Why would he? Poisoning didn't happen in houses like this, not to families like this. His arrogance was Selena's greatest ally. And then there was the catering van. It pulled up to the service entrance. Staff entered through the kitchen. They were not to be seen by guests until service began. Jalen Whitaker stepped out last, tall, lean, quiet. His uniform was borrowed from a coworker who called in sick, 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled at the wrists. In his back pocket, a small leather notebook worn soft at the edges, filled with chemical formulas in tight handwriting. It was the only thing he kept from his old life, the life no one here knew about. The life that was about to walk back through the front door. The dinner began. Guests arrived in black cars with tinted windows, Rolex watches, Hermes ties, dresses that cost more than Jalen earned in a year. They moved through the house like they owned the air itself, because in a way, they did. Jalen carried appetizer trays through the crowd. He kept his head down, his steps quiet, invisible. That was the job. Carry, serve, disappear. Gloria Bennett, the catering manager, had made it clear on the drive over. No talking to guests, no eye contact unless spoken to. You are furniture. Expensive furniture that doesn't break things. He understood. He had been furniture his whole life. The first pass took him along the main table, the one closest to the fireplace, reserved for Harrison Langston and his inner circle. Selena sat at Harrison's right. Avery sat at his left. Her wheelchair pulled close, a cashmere blanket over her thin legs. Jalen set down a tray of smoked salmon canapes, and that was when he saw Avery's hands. She reached for a water glass, and her fingers trembled so badly the glass nearly tipped. He steadied it without thinking. A quick, quiet touch. She looked up and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, but his eyes stayed on her fingernails, faint white horizontal lines running across every nail. Mace's lines. He had seen them before, in textbooks, in case studies, in his mother's hands weeks before she died. His stomach dropped. He looked at the amber supplement bottle sitting next to Avery's plate. Selena leaned over, voice sweet as honey. "Don't forget your evening pill, sweetheart." Avery swallowed the capsule with water. Jalen watched it go down and felt something cold crawl up his spine. He needed to get closer to that bottle. He reached across to adjust a napkin near Avery's plate, and his elbow caught a wine glass. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, spraying droplets toward Selena's plate. The table gasped. Selena recoiled. "Are you serious right now?" Harrison stood. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" A woman in diamonds across the table shook her head. "They'll hire anyone these days." Gloria Bennett appeared out of nowhere, face white as the tablecloth. She grabbed Jalen by the arm and dragged him toward the kitchen. Her nails dug into his skin through the fabric. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "That woman is about to become Mrs. Harrison Langston. This contract pays my rent for months. Do you understand?" "Ma'am?" The girl at the table, her fingernails. "I've seen those marks before. I think someone is—" "Stop!" Gloria held up a hand. "You are a waiter. You carry plates. You are not a doctor. You are not a detective. You are nothing in this house. Go polish the dessert forks and do not go near that table again." Jalen stood in the kitchen, hands shaking, not from fear, from recognition. He had been here before, as a boy, standing in a kitchen, trying to tell someone that his mother's tea smelled wrong. No one listened then either. He stepped outside for air. The terrace was empty, except for one man, Dr. Clayton Reeves, leaning against the stone railing, smoking a cigar. Gold cufflinks, silk pocket square, the kind of doctor who looked more like a magazine cover than a medical professional. Jalen approached carefully. "Excuse me, sir. I don't mean any disrespect, but I noticed something about Miss Langston's fingernails. White horizontal lines, Mace's lines, combined with her hair loss and tremors. Has anyone considered heavy metal exposure? Thallium, specifically?" Reeves turned slowly. He looked Jalen up and down, from the scuffed shoes to the stained uniform to the face still damp with champagne. "And you are?" "I work with the catering company tonight, sir, but I studied—" Reeves laughed. Not a polite laugh. A laugh that came from the belly and was meant to bury. "You studied? Where? Community college? YouTube University?" He flicked cigar ash toward Jalen's shoes. "Let me explain something to you, son. I trained at Columbia. I have treated the Langston family for 15 years. Avery has an autoimmune condition, complex layered, not something a boy who carries plates and cleans up spilled wine is going to diagnose tonight. Sir, if you just ran a 24-hour urine panel for—" "If I what?" Reeves stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Listen carefully. Go back to that kitchen. Pick up your tray. And if you approach any member of this family with your little theory again, I will personally ensure you never work in this state again. Not as a waiter, not as a dishwasher, not mopping floors. Are we clear?" He blew cigar smoke directly into Jalen's face and walked inside. Jalen stood alone on the terrace, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He looked down at them. The same hands that once held a pipette in a laboratory. The same hands that wrote a research paper cited in hundreds of forensic cases. Now they smelled like cigar ash and champagne. Minutes later, a staff member handed him Selena's Chanel clutch. She left it in the coat room. "Bring it to the dining room." He carried it across the hall. The clasp was loose. It popped open in his grip. Inside, a second amber pill bottle. Same label as the one on Avery's table. Identical design. But when Jalen brought it close, his nose caught something the naked eye could not. A faint metallic sweetness beneath the capsule coating. His blood went cold. He knew this smell. Not from a textbook, not from a lab, from his mother's kitchen. From the teacup on the counter the night before she went to the hospital for the last time. He palmed one capsule and slipped it into the leather notebook in his back pocket. Then he closed the clutch, delivered it to Selena, who took it without looking at him, without a word, without acknowledging he existed, and walked back toward the kitchen. But he did not go to the kitchen. "Man, this is hard to watch." They spat on him, blew smoke in his face, called him an animal. And he's the only one in that room trying to save a girl's life. Imagine that was you. Proof in your pocket, champagne on your face. Would you still speak up? Jalen pushed through the service door and crossed the gravel to the catering van parked behind the hedges. His hands were steady now. The doubt was gone. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, certainty. He climbed into the van, pulled the door shut, and sat on an overturned crate. The noise of the party faded into a distant hum. He was alone. For the first time tonight, he could think. He opened the leather notebook. The capsule sat pressed between 2 pages of chemical formulas. His own handwriting from another lifetime. He stared at it. Small, amber-coated, perfectly ordinary to anyone else in the world. Not to him. He cracked the capsule open over a clean ceramic plate from the catering supplies. A fine white powder spilled out. No smell to the naked nose, but Jalen had trained his senses the way a sommelier trains a palate. Years of lab work, thousands of samples. His nose was an instrument, and right now, it was screaming. He needed a test, not a lab test. He didn't have a lab. But he had something better. He had knowledge, and he had whatever was in this van. He moved fast, distilled water from the steam iron kit, a coffee filter torn into thin strips, a small bottle of household bleach from the cleaning supply box. These were not scientific instruments. They were the leftovers of a catering operation. But in the right hands, leftovers could become a laboratory. He dissolved the powder in a capful of distilled water. He dipped the coffee filter strip into the solution. Then he applied a single drop of bleach to the wet strip and waited. 30 seconds, 40, 50. The strip turned yellow-green. Jalen held it up under the dome light of the van. His hand did not shake. The color was unmistakable. A crude but effective range test variation, not admissible in court, not precise enough for a published paper. But enough. More than enough. The reaction was consistent with a thallium compound. He whispered to himself, "It's the same. It's exactly the same." He photographed everything. The crushed capsule on the plate, the dissolved solution, the yellow-green strip, the inside of Selena's clutch, which he had photographed earlier when the clasp popped open. Every image time-stamped on his phone. 4 photos. 4 pieces of a puzzle that no one in that mansion wanted to see. He sat in the van for a long moment, the leather notebook open on his knee. His mother's face somewhere behind his eyes. Not the face from the photograph on his kitchen table, but the face from the hospital bed. Gray skin, sunken eyes, hands that couldn't squeeze his fingers anymore. Grace Whitaker died on a Tuesday. The doctors wrote renal failure on the death certificate. The police investigated years later, only after a neighbor reported seeing his stepfather buy antifreeze in bulk. By then, Grace was bones in a pine box, and Jalen was a boy sleeping on a cousin's couch. He swore 2 things that year. First, he would learn everything there was to know about poison, every compound, every symptom, every test. He would become the person his mother never had. Second, if he ever stood in a room where someone was being poisoned, he would not stay silent. Not for comfort, not for safety, not for a paycheck. He looked at the yellow-green strip. Avery Langston was in her early 20s. She had a father who loved her. She had doctors who failed her. And she had a woman feeding her poison every single night while smiling and calling her sweetheart. Jalen could walk away, call the police anonymously, let the system work. But he knew how the system worked for people who looked like him. Slow, skeptical. Too late. His mother was proof. Years to investigate, years too many. Avery didn't have years. Based on the symptom progression he observed tonight, the tremors, the weight loss, the measles lines, she might not have months. And Selena had doubled down. The engagement, the wedding soon, the will. Everything was accelerating toward a finish line that ended with Avery in the ground and Selena holding $1 billion check. Jalen closed the notebook, put it in his vest pocket, buttoned his jacket. He stepped out of the van. The gravel crunched under his taped-together shoes. Music and laughter floated from the tent. Crystal and gold and people who had never once been ignored. He walked toward the light, not to the kitchen, not to the service entrance, straight to the front door of the dining room. Whatever happened next, he would not be furniture tonight. Harrison Langston was mid-toast when Jalen walked in. The billionaire stood at the head of the table, champagne raised, voice warm with rehearsed emotion. Selena brought light back into this house. She gave me a reason to... Mr. Langston. Harrison stopped. 80 heads turned. Gloria Bennett dropped a dessert plate in the kitchen doorway. The crash of porcelain echoed through the silence. Jalen stood 6 feet from the head table, still in his stained uniform, still smelling like the champagne Selena threw in his face an hour ago. Every pair of eyes in the room locked onto him. The waiter, who had already been warned, humiliated, and dismissed. Mr. Langston, your daughter is being poisoned. The woman sitting next to you is responsible, and I can prove it right now. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then the room exploded. Harrison's face went from confusion to fury. You again? I told you to leave. Jalen cut him off. His voice was calm, clinical, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this language 1,000 times in a laboratory. Progressive hair loss over months, peripheral neuropathy, the tremors in her hands, Mesa's lines, white horizontal bands on every fingernail, gastrointestinal distress, cognitive fog, rapid weight loss. Every single one of these is a textbook symptom of chronic thallium sulfate ingestion. Every single one. The medical terminology hit the room differently than the accusation of a waiter. Guests leaned forward. A few pulled out phones. Harrison's grip on his champagne glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. Dr. Clayton Reeves stood from his chair, face red, napkin still tucked into his collar. This is absurd. I have treated Avery for over a year. I've run comprehensive panels, autoimmune markers, thyroid function, inflammatory. Did you run a 24-hour urine heavy metal panel? Jalen asked. Quiet, direct, no anger, just the question. Reeves hesitated. 1 second too long, specifically for thallium. Jalen continued. Did you test for thallium, Dr. Reeves? That's not standard protocol for autoimmune. You didn't. Jalen nodded slowly. You never considered it because poisoning doesn't happen in houses like this, not to families like this. That's what you told me on the terrace an hour ago, right before you blew cigar smoke in my face. Murmurs rippled across the room. Reeves tugged at his collar. His arrogance had been a private performance. Now Jalen had dragged it onto the main stage. Selena moved before the momentum could shift. She rose from her chair, slowly, gracefully, tears forming in her eyes. Perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Her voice trembled just enough to sound broken. Harrison, I don't know who this man is. I don't know why he's doing this to us. On our night. She reached for Harrison's hand, her fingers intertwined with his. I sit with Avery every morning. I prepare her vitamins myself. I hold her hand when she can't sleep. And this? This is what I get? She turned to Jalen. The tears vanished. Ice replaced them. You're a waiter. You spilled wine on my table. You were caught touching my purse, and now you're accusing me of murder? She let out a short, sharp laugh. Harrison, check his pockets. He probably stole something and made up this whole story to cover himself. Vivian Hayes, Avery's godmother, old money, old opinions, stood from her chair and pointed at Jalen. Harrison, for God's sake, get this lunatic out before he ruins everything. This is exactly what happens when you hire cheap help. The crowd turned. Jalen could feel it. The room sliding back toward Selena. She was winning. She was always going to win. She had the dress, the ring, the tears, the story. He had a stained uniform and calloused hands. Harrison? Selena pressed harder, voice breaking again. This man is clearly disturbed, a stranger with a grudge, some fantasy about poison. This is textbook extortion. He saw the engagement in the papers and thought he could make a scene for money. Harrison's jaw tightened. He pulled his hand from Selena's and turned to Jalen. You have seconds to walk out of this house or I call the police myself. Daddy, wait. The voice came from the wheelchair. Small, thin, but clear enough to cut through every other sound in the room. Avery Langston. Everyone turned. Harrison's face softened instantly. Selena's did not. Avery held up her hands. They trembled under the chandelier light. White lines visible across every nail, even from feet away. He's right about my hands. Her voice cracked. I showed these to Dr. Reeves months ago. He said it was calcium deficiency. She looked at Reeves. The doctor looked away. I've been telling everyone something is wrong. No one listens. They just change my pills and tell me to rest. She turned to Jalen. Her eyes were exhausted but searching. The eyes of a woman who had been drowning in plain sight. How do you know what Mies lines are? The room held still. Jalen reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the leather notebook. He opened it on the table. The crushed capsule residue, the dried coffee filter strip still showing the yellow-green discoloration. This capsule came from a second bottle inside Ms. Voss's purse. Not the bottle on the table, a different one. Same label, different contents. He pointed to the strip. When dissolved and exposed to an oxidizing agent, the powder produced this color reaction. This is consistent with a thallium compound. He placed the notebook flat on the table, open, visible to everyone. I'm not asking you to believe me, Mr. Langston. I'm asking you to test it. Call a toxicology lab. Run the urine panel on your daughter tonight. If I'm wrong, I will accept any consequence you choose. Arrest me. Sue me. I don't care. He paused. But if I'm right, every day you wait, she gets worse. And whoever is giving her those capsules knows the wedding is soon. Silence. Selena's eyes darted fast, involuntary, to her Chanel clutch sitting on the table beside her plate. Just a flicker, half a second, then back to Harrison. But Avery saw it. From her wheelchair, from the lowest position in the room, the girl everyone had written off as fragile and fading. She saw exactly where Selena looked. And she did not forget. A chair scraped against the marble floor at the back of the room. Every head turned. An older man stood, silver hair, tweed jacket that looked decades out of fashion among the tuxedos. He had been sitting quietly at a corner table all evening. No one had paid him much attention. He was not a CEO. He was not a senator. He was not the kind of man who got invited to these events for his money. Harrison had invited him because years ago, Professor Everett Lang's research at Johns Hopkins helped Stonebridge Pharmaceuticals develop its flagship drug. Harrison wrote a substantial check to the university that year. Lang got a standing invitation to every Langston event since. He rarely came. Tonight, he wished he hadn't. Until now. Lang walked slowly toward the head table. His shoes were old leather. His tie was slightly crooked. He moved like a man who had spent decades in lecture halls. Unhurried, deliberate, impossible to interrupt. He stopped feet from Jalen. "Jalen?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper. Jalen turned. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Professor Lang. Lang studied him for a long moment. The borrowed uniform, the champagne stain, the calloused hands. Something tightened behind the old man's eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I thought I recognized you," Lang said quietly. "You've lost weight." He turned to Harrison Langston. The room was so silent that the candle flames flickering on the table sounded loud. "Mr. Langston, my name is Everett Lang. I ran the toxicology research laboratory at Johns Hopkins University for decades." He let that settle. "And I need to tell you something about the young man standing in front of you." Harrison said nothing. Selena's fingers curled around the edge of her chair. Jalen Whitaker was not just a student of mine. He was the most brilliant researcher I have ever worked with, and I have worked with hundreds. Lang reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened a browser, typed for a moment, and held the screen toward Harrison. "This is a paper published in the Journal of Analytical Toxicology years ago. Rapid field detection of thallium sulfate in consumer food products. It established a new protocol that is now used in forensic investigations in countries. It has been cited in hundreds of criminal cases worldwide." He lowered the phone. Jalen Whitaker is the co-author. He designed the core methodology. He was in his mid-20s when he wrote it. The air left the room. Guests who had sneered at Jalen minutes ago stared at him with open mouths. Vivian Hayes, who had called him a lunatic, sat down without a word. Dr. Reeves loosened his tie with shaking fingers. His face had gone from red to gray. Lang was not finished. He left our program not because he lacked talent, not because he failed. He left because his funding was cut and he could not afford to continue. The professor's voice cracked for the first time. "I should have fought harder for him. I didn't. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life." He looked at the test strip on the table, the yellow-green coffee filter sitting on the worn leather notebook. "The improvised test he performed tonight is crude. It would not survive peer review, but it is scientifically sound. And if that strip turned yellow-green from a capsule found in this house?" Lang looked directly at Harrison. "You do not have a sick daughter, Mr. Langston. You have a poisoned one. And this young man may be the only person in this room qualified to tell the difference." Harrison Langston stared at Jalen. Really stared. For the first time all night. He saw the scuffed shoes, the borrowed uniform, the rough hands. And he saw something he had missed before. Something behind the eyes. Not anger. Not desperation. Certainty. "How?" Harrison's voice was barely a whisper. "How did you know to look?" Jalen was quiet for a long moment. The room waited. "My mother." 2 words. Heavy as stones. "Grace Whitaker. She died when I was a boy. Her husband, my stepfather, put ethylene glycol in her tea for months. Doctors called it kidney failure." He touched the scar above his left eyebrow. "The one from the very first moment of this story. He gave me this the night I tried to take her teacup away." The room did not move, did not breathe. "I became a toxicologist because I was a boy who couldn't save his mother. I swore I would never stand in a room and stay silent again." He looked at Harrison. "So no, Mr. Langston, I will not leave." Selena Voss sat perfectly still. Her smile was gone. Her tears were gone. What remained was something raw. The face of a woman watching her masterpiece crack down the middle, and the crack was about to split wide open. Selena Voss did not panic. She recalculated. The tears were done. The trembling voice was done. A new version of her rose from the chair, harder, sharper, built for war. "A conspiracy." She said it softly, almost amused. "That's what this is." She looked at Harrison. Think, darling. Think clearly. A stranger shows up at our engagement dinner. A man who carries plates for a living. He somehow gets his hands on my purse, takes something out of it, crushes it in a van, mixes it with bleach, and now he's telling you it's poison? She gestured at the test strip. That could be anything. Turmeric, vitamin residue? He crushed it. No chain of custody, no lab verification, no witness to what he actually tested. This isn't evidence. This is a performance. She swept her gaze across the room, slow, deliberate, landing on every face. Are we really letting a man in a stained uniform with a sad childhood story destroy this family? Where is the actual proof? The room wavered. Selina could feel it, the social physics tilting back in her direction. Doubt was easier than belief. Suspicion was easier than action. And a beautiful woman in an elegant gown would always outweigh a black man in borrowed clothes. Dr. Reeves smelled the shift and stepped forward, emboldened. Professor Lang, with all respect, a coffee filter test is not admissible evidence. It's a parlor trick. I've treated Avery with standard protocols for over a year. There is no poisoning here. 2 guests near the back nodded. A woman whispered to her husband, "This is ridiculous." Another shook his head at Jalen with open contempt. Lang opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance, because Avery Langston gasped. A small sound, almost nothing. But it silenced the room faster than any shout. Her water glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Shards scattered beneath the table like broken stars. Her body went rigid in the wheelchair, spine arched, hands clenched into fists. Then she slumped sideways, eyes rolling back, breathing shallow and rapid. Harrison screamed her name. Chairs crashed backward as guests scrambled from the table. A woman knocked over a champagne tower, glass and liquid cascading across the marble in a golden wave. The string quartet dropped their instruments. A child somewhere in the house started crying. Reeves rushed to Avery's side, pressed 2 fingers to her neck. His own hands were shaking. "She's tachycardic, pulse over 140, possible seizure. Someone call 911. But Jalen was already there. He knelt beside the wheelchair, took her wrist, not for the pulse, but for the skin temperature. Burning. He lifted her eyelid gently. Pupils dilated wide. He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. Damp, scorching heat radiating through the skin. "This isn't a seizure." His voice was steady, dead calm, the voice of a man standing exactly where he was trained to stand. "This is acute thallium crisis. Peripheral vasodilation, tachycardia. She ingested a higher dose tonight than her body could metabolize." He looked up, not at Reeves, not at Harrison, straight at Selina. "You increased the dose tonight, the night you announced the wedding date. You wanted her to collapse here, in front of witnesses, so it would look like her condition finally overwhelmed her. A natural progression, a tragic decline, and no one would question it." Selina's lips parted. No sound came out. For the first time all evening, her mask slipped. Not much, but enough. Vivian Hayes, who minutes ago wanted Jalen dragged from the building, grabbed Selina's arm hard enough to wrinkle the ivory silk. "What did you give her tonight?" "What did you give her?" Selina yanked free. "Nothing. I gave her nothing." "This is insane." "Her phone." The whisper came from below, from the wheelchair. Avery, barely conscious, face white as the tablecloth, lips barely moving, forced out 2 words that changed everything. "Her phone. Check her phone." Jalen froze. He remembered the moment in the dining room when he placed the notebook on the table. Selina's eyes darting to her Chanel clutch. A flicker, half a second, involuntary. He hadn't understood it then. Avery had. From the lowest seat in the room, from a wheelchair everyone looked past, the girl no one listened to had been watching the woman no one suspected. Quietly, carefully, the way only someone who has been invisible for a very long time knows how to watch. Jalen looked at Harrison. "Mr. Langston, her phone, now!" Harrison turned to Selina. His face was unreadable. A man standing on the edge of something he couldn't come back from. "Give me your phone." "Harrison, this is insane. You cannot seriously—" "Give me your phone, Selina." She lunged for the clutch, fast, desperate, all pretense gone. But Elliot Trent was faster. The old lawyer, Harrison's friend for decades, quiet all evening, watching everything, snatched the bag from the table and stepped back. He opened the glass with steady hands. Inside, the second supplement bottle, now missing one capsule, and the phone. Trent held the phone to Selena's face. The screen unlocked. She had used her fingerprint for a selfie earlier, and the auto lock hadn't re-engaged. Trent navigated with a lawyer's instinct. Settings, messages recently deleted. And there it was, a text thread. Selena Voss to Dr. Clayton Reeves. Deleted hours ago, recovered in taps. Trent's face drained of color. He handed the phone to Harrison without a word. Harrison read aloud. His voice broke on every line. Selena to Reeves. Double the dose tonight. She needs to be hospitalized before the signing on Monday. The room stopped breathing. Reeves to Selena, that's dangerous. If she crashes at the dinner. A woman at a side table covered her mouth with both hands. Selena to Reeves. Then it looks like her disease progressed. No one will question it. You said it yourself. The autoimmune diagnosis is airtight. Harrison's hand shook so badly the phone rattled against his wedding ring. Reeves to Selena, fine. But after this I want the rest of my payment. Harrison set the phone on the table. Gently. The way a man handles something that has just ended his entire world. The room erupted. Voices crashing over each other. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Two men blocked the dining room exit, arms crossed, staring at Reeves. Reeves crumbled. He backed into the wall, hands raised, sweat pouring down his temples. She told me it was a mild anxiolytic just to keep Avery sedated. I didn't know it was, I swear I didn't. He looked at Selena with naked desperation. Begging, drowning. Selena's voice came out like a blade. 2 words, fast, venomous, automatic. Shut up, Clayton. 80 guests heard it. Every waiter, every security guard. 2 words, and the entire architecture of her deception collapsed. Not a denial, not confusion, a command. The command of a woman who had been giving this man orders for months. Her hand flew to her mouth 1 second too late. The words were already in the air, already in 80 memories, already evidence. Harrison Langston turned to Selena. His voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence it carried to every corner of the room. I let you into my home. I let you sit beside my daughter. I was going to give you my name. But Avery was still fading. Jalen turned from the wreckage and moved. Kitchen. Filtration cabinet beneath the industrial water system. A sealed bag of activated carbon granules. High-end estates with well water always had them. He had counted on it. He crushed the granules, mixed them into a glass of water, and came back to Avery. The room parted for him. No one blocked his path now. This is activated charcoal. It will bind the thallium still in your stomach and slow absorption. It won't cure you, but it buys time until the hospital can administer Prussian blue. He held the glass steady. Can you drink? Avery nodded weakly. She drank 1 sip at a time. Jalen held the glass. Lang monitored her pulse. Harrison held her other hand, tears streaming down his face. The tears of a man who just discovered the greatest danger to his daughter had been sleeping in the bedroom next to his. Sirens. Distant at first, then growing. Red and blue light washing across the estate windows. Paramedics came through the front door minutes later. Jalen briefed them the way he would brief a colleague. Dosage timeline, suspected compound, symptoms observed, interventions performed. Calm, precise, every word carrying the weight of years of training. The lead paramedic looked at him. Are you her physician? No. I'm the caterer. The paramedic blinked, looked at Lang. Lang nodded once. Every recommendation was followed without another question. They loaded Avery onto the stretcher. As she passed Jalen, a thin, trembling hand reached out and found his calloused one. She squeezed. Barely any pressure, but enough. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. No one believed me. Thank you for believing what you saw. The stretcher rolled through the front door. Red lights swallowed her into the night. Jalen stood in the dining room, champagne-stained clothes, an empty glass of charcoal water in his hand. His mother's leather notebook in his pocket, 80 guests staring at him. The man they had mocked, ignored, spat on, and threatened to arrest. No one called him a cockroach now. Greenwich police arrived minutes after the paramedics. 2 cruisers, no sirens. Elliot Trent had called ahead and asked them to come quietly. There was nothing quiet about what they found. Trent met them at the door with the evidence laid out like a case file. The phone. Text messages between Selena Voss and Dr. Clayton Reeves. Time-stamped, screenshotted, preserved. The second supplement bottle from Selena's clutch, still containing capsules that would later test positive for thallium sulfate at a DEA-certified lab in Hartford. Jalen's photographs. The crushed capsule. The dissolved solution. The yellow-green test strip. All time-stamped on his phone. And the statements. 80 guests who heard Selena Voss say, "Shut up, Clayton." 2 words that no defense attorney in the country could explain away. The officers spoke with Harrison first, then Lang, then Jalen. Then they walked into the dining room, where Selena Voss sat exactly where they had left her. Ivory gown, perfect posture, hands folded on the table. She had not moved in minutes. She had not spoken. She had not cried. The officer read the charges. Attempted murder by poisoning, assault with a toxic substance, criminal conspiracy. Selena stood when asked. She extended her wrists without resistance. The 3-carat diamond was removed and dropped into a clear evidence bag. It made a small, sharp sound against the plastic, like a period at the end of a sentence. She looked at Jalen as they walked her past him, not with anger, not with hatred, with something worse. The hollow recognition that she had been undone by the one person in the room she never considered a threat. Dr. Clayton Reeves was arrested separately in the kitchen where he had retreated after the text messages were read. He did not go quietly. He cried. He begged. He said, "I didn't know," 4 times before the handcuffs clicked shut. The dining room emptied slowly. Roses wilting on the tables, champagne going flat in forgotten glasses, candles burning down to nothing. Harrison Langston stood alone at the head of the table, the place where hours ago he had raised a glass to the woman who was murdering his daughter. He looked at Jalen. His voice was raw, stripped of everything, money, power, pride. Just a father. "She would have died." "Yes, sir." "Eventually." "Yes. And I would have married the woman who killed her." Jalen said nothing. There was nothing to say. Harrison's hands trembled. "How do I repay something like this?" "You don't need to repay me, Mr. Langston. Get your daughter tested. Prussian blue treatment, chelation therapy. Thallium damage is reversible if caught in time." He paused. "She still has time." Jalen picked up his leather notebook from the table, tucked it into his vest pocket, buttoned his jacket, the same borrowed, stained, champagne-soaked jacket he had worn all night. He turned toward the kitchen, back to the catering van, back to his other life. "Mr. Whitaker." Jalen stopped. "Wait." Weeks later, Avery Langston walked out of Greenwich Hospital on her own 2 feet. No wheelchair, no trembling hands, jeans, white sweater, sneakers, the kind of clothes a young woman in her early 20s should have been wearing all along. She had gained pounds. Her hair was growing back, short, dark, stubborn. Her fingernails were clear. The Mies lines were gone. The toxicology panel, run the night of the dinner, confirmed lethal concentrations of thallium in her blood, urine, and hair follicles. Months of accumulation. Doctors told Harrison that without intervention, Avery had weeks left. Not before death, but before permanent brain damage. The kind you don't come back from. Prussian blue treatment began within hours of admission. Jalen's activated charcoal had bought the critical window. The attending toxicologist later told the press, the field intervention at the Langston estate was unorthodox but medically sound. It may have saved her cognitive function entirely. He did not know the intervention was performed by a caterer. Avery posted one photograph the day she left the hospital. Herself, standing in sunlight, holding a handwritten note. "Someone saw what no one would." Signed, "Thank you, JL." Millions of shares in hours. More by the end of the week. Selena Voss's trial began months later. The prosecution's case was surgical. Text messages, supplement bottles, capsules testing positive for thallium sulfate at dozens of times commercial concentration. Overseas pharmacy records traced through a shell company and a fake business license. Months of purchase history. Months of poison-labeled vitamin D daily wellness. Denied bail. Her defense attorney argued entrapment. The judge dismissed it in words. The defendant was not trapped. She was caught. Convicted on all charges. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly substance, criminal conspiracy. Decades, no parole for years. She showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Dr. Clayton Reeves cooperated fully. Testimony, records, bank statements, payments from Selena's account. License permanently revoked. Guilty plea. Years. His public statement was sentences. The last one hit hardest. I chose comfort over curiosity. I diagnosed what was easy, not what was true. A young man in a waiter's uniform saw what I refused to see in my own examination room. Harrison Langston did 3 things. First, a full doctoral scholarship for Jalen at Johns Hopkins. Professor Lang personally sponsored the re-enrollment and called it the most overdue decision in the history of this university. Second, the Grace Whittaker Foundation, named after Jalen's mother, free heavy metal toxicology screening for domestic abuse victims. The test never run for Grace. The test that could have saved her. Jalen was named founding scientific director. Third, a corner office at Stonebridge Pharmaceuticals, head of health and safety, 6-figure salary, company car, everything a man from modest beginnings was never supposed to have. Jalen said, "No. I appreciate it, Mr. Langston, truly. But I do my best work when I'm the person nobody expects. The moment I sit behind a desk with my name on the door, I become someone people see coming." He smiled. I'd rather be the waiter. Avery and Jalen never became lovers. They became something rarer, 2 people who understood what it meant to be invisible in a room full of people who should have seen them. She wrote him letters, real ones, paper and ink, no email, no text. She sent them to his apartment in McDowell County, where he still lived while finishing his doctorate. In one she wrote, "You told my father I could recover fully. You were right, but you recovered something else too. My belief that good people exist in rooms full of people who've stopped looking." Jalen kept every letter in the leather notebook next to the chemical formulas, next to the empty space where the capsule page used to be, now sitting in an evidence locker in Hartford, tagged as exhibit in the case of State of Connecticut versus Selena Voss. He went back to his water treatment plant job. His coworkers didn't know what happened at the Langston dinner. He didn't tell them. He brought coffee for the morning shift, ran his lab tests, went home to his small apartment where his mother's photograph sat on the kitchen table. Some nights he looked at her face and said nothing. Some nights he said, "I didn't stay quiet this time, Mama." That was enough. This story was never about poison. It was about what we choose to see and what we choose to ignore. The thallium was in the capsule, but the real poison was in the assumption that a black man in a borrowed uniform couldn't possibly know more than a doctor with a Columbia degree. That dirty hands meant a dirty mind. That poverty meant ignorance. That the person who entered through the service door had nothing to say worth hearing. They were wrong. They are always wrong. And somewhere tonight, in a restaurant kitchen, on a factory floor, behind a delivery truck, there is another Jalen Whittaker holding the answer no one asked for, seeing what no one else will look at, waiting for someone to listen. Don't be the room that stayed silent. God, they called him a cockroach. A stray dog spat in his face, and he still saved that girl's life. What if that was you? Standing there, proof in your pocket, the whole room against you? Think about that. Drop a comment. Like, share, subscribe. See you next time.